back to 1700. I'm Natalia, and today we've got a very special guest joining us, the one and only Berish Bilander, the CEO of Green Music Australia. Green Music Australia is a globally recognised environmental not-for-profit organisation, leading change in the Australian music sector to create a greener, cleaner future. Thanks for joining us today, Berish.
Absolute pleasure. Great to be here, Natalia.
So I've given just a very brief description of what Green Music Australia does, but just for our viewers who may not be familiar with you guys, so who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, well, we're a pretty small not-for-profit charity that operates across the country with the aim of empowering artists and music industry and professionals to clean up their act and go as green as we possibly can. So, you know, whether we're looking at our transport, our merchandise, our electricity usage, there's ways that we can do a lot better. And I think, as everyone's seen with recent weather events and even COVID, you know, we really have to take our responsibilities seriously when it comes to climate. And so we're here to try and make that transition as easy as possible.
Amazing. So what's your personal background with interacting and being part of the Australian music scene, and how does that influence your work?
Great question. I grew up loving music, as a lot of us do, played piano throughout high school, and then studied it in tertiary education, so jazz pianist by training. I think after graduating, I started doing some fantastic tours, got to jump on with Vicar and Linda Bull and do a national tour with them, which was really fun. And a bunch of other acts. And then I'm also a songwriter myself. So I was doing a bunch of things. I think what happened was I spent a year living in Indonesia with my partner. And in that time, I got to see a lot of the problems that I think we still face in Australia, but there wasn't a veneer of it being okay. You know, where we've got these wonderful trucks that come and pick up our trash every week. In Indonesia, that doesn't happen. So all the trash that was being created was sort of being burnt on street corners. And it made me really reflect on, you know, the role musicians can play in helping to change society. You know, a lot of my idols have been at the forefront of social movements through history, whether it's Bob Dylan, Nina Simone, others. And I thought, oh, well, I want to be involved in that movement, you know, one that's talking to the biggest challenge of our times, which is climate change. So I came back, got involved with Green Music Australia, and now I'm running it. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's definitely an amazing cause. Sorry. So Green Music has recently launched Sound Country, which is a green artist guide. So it's a guide for our viewers that gives musicians the practical tools they need to implement sustainable solutions and involve their audiences in change. So I believe that the guide's been a long time in the making. So just how long have you been working towards this initiative?
Well, the guide distills a lot of work that we've been implementing for getting close to a decade now. The one unique thing about the guide is that we partnered with Rhoda Roberts, who is a veteran arts producer. She's a Bundjalung woman, and she's been curating First Nations programs for the Sydney Opera House and Pachama Festival and Boomerang Festival, which sits along Blues Fest, for well over a couple of decades, maybe longer. And she was generous enough to, you know, come on board this project Sound Country and co-author bits of the guide, so that now we have a really strong connection, which we've always wanted, with why going green matters, and also why elevating First Nation voices is part of that process. So yeah, look, it's been a long time coming, but we've finally released the guide itself. Sound Country is available on our website, and you can download it. You can check it out. There's also an interactive map, which Steph Hughes is a local Melbourne illustrator and musician herself designed. And so it's kind of fun to explore and click around and check out bits and pieces of it. But yeah, it's an invitation for the music industry to get stuck in and get serious about how they can do their bit.
Yeah, so a lot of collaboration involved, like sounds. So what made you realise that there was no sort of current framework for making the music scene greener, and that this was something that needed to exist as a resource?
Look, I suppose having been in the job for a while, I know that there are actually an abundant amount of resources out there, but not many for musicians. So most are for event organisers, people that, yeah, that have large budgets and are putting on major shows, that kind of thing. And they're really valuable resources. But I think we wanted something that spoke in a different language, was also very much rooted in this continent. A lot of the guides come out of the States or come out of UK and Europe. And, you know, there's something very special about this country. First and foremost, that we've got the oldest cultures in the world, people that have been connected with their countries for, you know, 80,000+ years. And so we needed that to be really central in the document. And secondly, you know, it's a vast landmass, isn't it, that we try to travel with small city centres. So there's some unique challenges in Australia, and we wanted to speak to them in a really friendly and formal way that Australians often speak to each other, not necessarily highbrow or certainly not overly technical. We wanted something to be really accessible. So I think when Montaigne, the artist Montaigne, came onto our board in 2018, she identified it as well. She was like, there's a need for this. Artists are hungry for some guidance. And she started the process, and we took it from there. And 4 years later, we've got something to share with the world.
Yeah, so just speaking about the campaign, you have split it into six sections, which you've touched on a bit already. So there's First Nations first, waste reduction, low carbon transport, sustainable food, ethical merchandise, and climate advocacy. So I'm personally a big fan of all these different topics because it breaks it down like you've just sort of described, and means that artists are able to reduce their footprint step by step by focusing on smaller areas and then like expanding into, you know, the overall impact. So was that the reason behind sectioning it off? You kind of did touch on that a little bit just then, or was there just sort of a greater purpose behind splitting it up into all those different elements?
I think those elements speak to really important areas that artists can focus on. We were lucky enough to receive significant grant from Creative Victoria. So that's something I didn't mention before. That's really what tipped us over the edge and managed to get us from an idea that Montaigne started to producing the guide. But in those discussions with Creative Vic and continuing discussions with artists, we know that merchandise is something that people rely on for an income, but it's also often has a carbon footprint. We know that touring is an important way of connecting with audiences, but it also can come with major emissions. We know that there's only so much we can do as a community when we look at the various sustainability pillars like waste, like travel, like food. But actually some of these changes need to be done at a government level. And that's where our role as advocates for change is really important. And that's probably another thing in this guide that I didn't talk about earlier that's quite different from what's happening overseas. We're unashamedly talking about the role that activism and advocacy plays in changing the political landscape, such that, you know, an artist can do their absolute best when they're traveling around the country, but it's not up to them to install a fast train from Melbourne to Sydney to Brisbane. You know, then that fast train could potentially slash their emissions and give them a low impact way of touring. But at this stage, they've got no option. Well, it's not no options, but there's fewer options than there should be. Okay, so, you know, when it comes to public transport investment, when it comes to major renewable energy investment, you know, that's an economic lever that needs to be pulled is at government level. So, you know, that's what we want. That's why we ran a really big No Music on a Dead Planet campaign in the lead up to the last election. And while we'll continue to be in that space until, I suppose, our politicians are doing everything they can to deal with this crisis.
Yeah, so I think climate change is such a sort of big issue that even the individual person, it's kind of like, where do you begin? So it's really good that you guys are breaking it down and making it really accessible for people to make a difference. So don't go anywhere, because we'll be back chatting about Green Music Australia shortly, and you're watching 1700. You're watching 1700, and we're back with Berish, CEO of Green Music Australia. We've gotten a bit of an insight into the process of creating their new guide, Sound Country, but there's still so much more to discuss. So you've been able to get a bunch of artists involved with your mission, like Missy Higgins, Montaigne, as you mentioned earlier, Regurgitator, and Lisa Mitchell, to name a few. How did this artist support come about? Like, did you have to reach out to recruit artists, or did they come to you? Like, what was that sort of process?
Look, artists are sort of part of our DNA. I've played with a bunch of them, and so has my colleague, Emma Bosworth, who's up in Brizzy. And I think from the inception of our organization, like almost a decade ago, we've been running campaigns with artists. Artists are the spokespeople you want to have on your campaign. So I think we had a lot of pre-existing relationships. And as I said earlier, artists were seeing the need for a document like this, a resource to support them. And so we were really fortunate to have people like Missy Higgins and Regurgitator kick in some money to, alongside Creative Vic, to enable is like a host of artists that have participated in our various programs, whether they did a shout out through Party with the Planet, which is something we run to try and deal with campsite litter. I don't know if any one of your viewers has been to a youth festival and seen, discarded tents and other things strewn over the campsite. Like, a lot of artists are really dismayed by that. They want to change that culture. So heaps of people, kicked in and contributed to some artist-led marketing campaigns where people were saying, take it home. And we also had a bunch of artists support the No Music on a Jet Planet campaign that literally just ran in May before the election. So, whether it's something for Kate, the Living End, or smaller local acts like Jess Ribeiro, like, we've got a big number of artists that care about climate issues, that see how it intersects with all these other issues that are important to them, like mental health or poverty. Like, there's so much intersectionality between all these issues. And so they're coming on board and very happy to promote and learn from the resources themselves.
Yeah, I think it's so amazing that so many of them are keen to get on board in such an important cause. So one of your missions, or things that you do, I guess, is to reduce waste across festivals and performances, which you've just touched on. So you've achieved this on a number of occasions. One of the examples is switching to providing reusable plates and cutlery instead of disposable things to try and reduce waste that way. So do you find that music attendees have been quite receptive of such changes and that they're willing to do their bit for the greater cause?
Oh, look, I think when people are presented and get the experience to go to a music festival that's green, it's a delight. I don't think many people love wading through trash at an event. I think they accept it if that becomes the norm. And I also think there's such a, it's well known in behavior change circles that once you see something happen, your tolerance for it increases and you're more likely to do it yourself. So if you see other people litter, you're more likely to do it. But there's certainly a number of events around the traps that are leading the way and therefore showing us what it's like to party with the planet. That slogan that we've actually taken from a wonderful group called Be Alternative, who paint it all over the place when they are working alongside an event. And so you've got I don't know if your viewers have checked out something like Strawberry Fields, which happens on the border of the Murray River border. And that's like about 10,000 people that come together over a weekend. And what you've got there, is this amazing ecosystem built around one of the most important rivers on our continent. And there was a massive change that happened when an event organisers decided to switch over to reusable crockery, reusable cutlery, reusable cup systems, because I suppose the luxury that you're afforded as an event organizer is if you change the system, then no one has a choice but to do it that way. And so literally every food truck was running with the reuse. Every fan just was eating out of them, and then would to redeem their deposit, they had to take it back to get washed. And so what they saw was like a 50% reduction in waste. And those kind of reductions are just absolutely staggering. I know councils are trying to reduce the waste coming out of our houses every day. And, if they achieve a 1% or 2% reduction in a year, they'd be really happy with that. And what you can do at a festival when you've got control over the infrastructure is just phenomenal.
Even personally, I did attend Strawberry Fields myself, and I remember being amazed about the reusable colour and thinking, why hasn't this been a thing before? And it was obviously easy to implement. I'm not sure behind the scenes of it, but everyone was easy, willing to go along with it. So yeah, so
absolutely, a big shout out to the organisers like Tara Benny, because she, had the vision to want that to happen and also invested in it. So it did take. It's not like it doesn't take any thought, and it is quite a logistics challenge behind the scenes, but it's working. And I think, people that get to go to those festivals and see what it's like, go, wow, there's a different way of partying. You don't
Yeah.
have to destroy everything and leave an absolute waste carnage in our mess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just wanted to bring up the dreaded C word, COVID. So obviously during COVID, performances couldn't happen, festivals, all these sort of things. How did you guys have to adapt to be able to continue doing your work through such a difficult time?
Oh God, that's a good question. We did adapt, and it was really difficult because a lot of the focus of activities were on the live entertainment industry. I think what happened is we pivoted to focusing more on artists. Artists have this platform, as we mentioned. People were streaming more than they ever had through COVID. People were connecting with musicians more than they ever had, even though it was virtually for the most part. And that was a real opportunity to get messages out, to talk. The footprint of the music industry changed vastly. It moved much more into the virtual space. So what kind of impact does cloud computing have, where we're storing a lot on the cloud. So therefore there's intense mega servers that are air conditioned all the time and sucking heaps of power. So it's not like there was no impact, but what it did open up is this really great conversation space. So we held something called Climate Fridays, which I don't know if anyone's familiar with Greta Thunberg and the amazing work she did with her movement of speaking up every Friday, skipping school to protest basically out the front of her parliament's offices. We sort of continued that with the student strikers locally, and we had a fantastic artist every week come on and hold a conversation with the student strikers and play some music online. That was one of the various things we did through that time. But no, I'm not going to lie to you, it was not fun.
Yeah.
COVID hasn't been fun for anyone in the music industry.
Yeah.
Absolutely devastating.
Yeah, so just to finish up, so what are the best ways to keep up to date with Sound Country and Green Music Australia, either online or?
Yeah, I would say check out our socials, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you're into, and jump on Sound Country. We're pretty easy to find. I mean, if you look up Green Music, Google it, it'll come up, and it's there on the main navigation header. And when you go in, explore, hit things, but also sign up to our newsletter, and you'll get all the updates you need. We're volunteer-driven organisation, so if there are people that feel passionately about greening up the music scene, hit us up as well.
Amazing. So we're really looking forward to seeing the incredible work that Green Music Australia does in making a real impact. So massive thank you to CEO Berish Bilander for joining us on today's show. Be sure to keep up with them online or participate in any sustainable practices you may see at the next gig you might attend. So you're watching 1700.